Hello, hope all is well. So today I thought we'd have a quick look at different things that we can do on tightening a high gain tone and going really to town with it. So we'll build a new preset here, really simple. We'll have an in and an out, hook those together, have an amp and a cab, smack bang into the middle here. And I'll just add a gate block afterwards that we'll be setting up in a sidechain style, and I'll link to a video that I did on how to do that. So in terms of the amp, I'm going to deliberately pick something that is, I guess, notoriously flubby, and then see what sort of things that we can do to really kind of change and affect how that sounds and the response of it. So that would be the Recto 2 Red Modern. And then for the cab, we're going to be going for a Dynacab, and then we'll go for, let's go for a Recto Straight, and just one dynamic mic. I'll just put the distance to 0, and that position's about right. So this is what we'll be working with. So hardly the most kind of destructive high gain sound that we can think of. And the first thing you might think of is, okay, let's max the gain out and see how that sounds. And I'll add a drive block as well, which is something that's typically done with the boost maxed out, and we'll see where we get to with that. So yeah, a lot of gain, but it's still kind of really flubby sounding. So are there a few things that we can do to the amp itself in order to sort of remedy that or to further improve on that without touching the gain settings here? So we've got gain maxed out. We've got the drive block, which is a Tube Screamer 808, level maxed, low drive. And then we'll see what we can do on the amp to further mess with the tone and kind of clean things up. And a big one here is using the cut button here within the ideal tab on the amp block page. So in essence, turning this on is going to filter out more of the low end going into the amp. And with all things Fractal, there's kind of different ways of doing it. And there's also this input EQ tab over here. So as you can see, the low cut is currently at 13 Hertz. But if we increase that, we can further dial in how, I guess, tight the amp might sound and respond to your guitar. So by doing that, we can really kind of clean up how the guitar is going into the amp itself and get a tighter response in the process. I will note that the low cut here, or using the cut knob, you'll get similar results, if that makes sense. I believe the cut, I can't really say what frequency it's set at, but it's essentially doing a very similar thing to the amp itself, and then in the process you'll get a similar kind of result. So it's down to taste. Try each one, experiment as always, try the cut knob, and then on the input EQ as well if you want. Now, something else that we can do here is also adding an additional boost. I know it sounds a bit crazy given how much gain we've got going into the amp, and we can do this to further increase the sort of level going into the amp, and also apply an additional EQ curve within the preamp page block. So on the boost type, we can add another Tube Screamer style, I guess EQ in this case, it's not the actual drive. But we can also add something like, say, the grinder boost. We've got a mid boost here. We've even got a treble boost, which can be quite interesting. My favorite tends to be the FAS boost. So we'll hear how that sounds with that off and on, including the Tube Screamer out front. So yeah, probably way too much gain at this point. So at this point, what we can do is we can actually pull back on the gain on the amp while keeping all these other settings. So with all this extra boost going on, just by messing around with the gain knob now, we can get a different kind of tone and response. So you can see there, by just messing around with the gain and also the levels of boost that you're applying to the front of the amp, you can get really different kinds of tones. So all the gain is not necessarily best coming all from the amp. It's always sort of like a balancing act, at least for me, when trying out high gain tones and getting the sort of level of boost right for the style of playing that I enjoy, which tends to be, I guess, a drier, more percussive style amp than this one, and then using all these other things that we have at our disposal to get closer to that tone or that idea that we have in our heads. And then add to this different tweaks that we can do to the actual amp EQ itself, and we can really dial in something to our liking. Now, something else which is kind of fun to do is if we just shunt off this drive block here, we have this input trim knob, which is going to dictate essentially a sort of the level of boost that's going into the amp itself. And if we reduce the input trim, it will reduce the level going into the amp. But however, we can also go into positive values all the way up to 10, which is absolutely huge. So using the same settings here, so the gain's at 7, we've got the preamp boost on at 12 decibels, and I'll use different values on the input trim to give you an idea of what that's doing to the sound. So by using these different elements, we can dictate the sort of levels of gain that we have going on with the amp, and then we can also figure out how we're affecting the signal of the guitar, or how we're shaping how the guitar signal is going into the amp itself. And by that I mean how much lows, for example, that we're cutting going into the amp, which can be really useful, and then in the process clean up the signal and get a tighter kind of response. So the thing here is to deliberately show an amp that doesn't have the sort of response that I'd go for, but by using these various tweaks I can get it more to a place where, you know, I kind of might actually use it. And this was just to give you some ideas and stuff to experiment with. So there you go. I hope there's a few things that you could take away from that. I mean, in essence, it's just experimenting with stuff. I mean, with using amps and things like this, I find there's always this kind of fine balancing act between the sort of response of the amp itself, the level of gain, and then the boost and the sort of cutting or filtering that you're doing to the actual guitar before hitting the amp to get different tones and a response out of something. And typically, I'll usually just look at an amp first and find something where the response is pretty much what I'm after, and then use these sort of techniques, I guess, to further refine the sound and get closer to the sort of thing I'm after. In any case, hope that was useful, and I hope to see you in the next video. Take care.